with Faraz Shaukat-Ali.
Call for lifting of UN ban to pave the way for them to give evidence. Good morning and welcome to Newsline, live from the Newsfirst studio in Dawson Street in Colombo. This morning we are joined by probably one of Britain's most famous broadcasters and pretty well known in Sri Lanka too. For 27 years he has been the face of Channel 4 News, and this morning we are delighted to welcome Mr. John Snow. John, good morning and welcome to Newsline.
Good morning, Uncle. Good morning.
Uncle. So this time round you've been in Sri Lanka. Have you been mobbed?
No, not at all. And the contrast in atmosphere is very considerable, contrasted with when I last came with David Cameron to the Commonwealth Prime Minister's Conference.
So you would say that Sri Lanka is progressing?
Well, it's certainly progress that there is peace, and that's undeniable. But of course, any Sri Lankan would know there are a lot of other issues still to be resolved.
And on this trip, you've been up north?
Yes, indeed. We were given a sort of laissez-passer by the Prime Minister.
Indeed.
And I felt the very fact that we were invited suggested change was in the air.
Right.
And lots of people in the north speak specifically about the effect change of government has had. I mean, it's far from what they want in totality.
Yeah.
But they do speak regularly of the fact that something has changed.
And did you notice that the Jaffna itself appears vibrant? There's a lot of activity.
I mean, there's a big contrast from when I was last there. Not that I was there for very long the last time.
But the last time, of course, David Cameron went off on a visit to one of those newspapers, to the Udayan newspaper, and I think perhaps the people there mistook you for being the Prime Minister, but you were mobbed, weren't you?
Well, I think that the problem then was that there was still a huge number of relatives of the disappeared who wanted him to go and investigate their cases.
Right.
They never got close to him. They saw a tall white man, and they thought, Uncle, we'll try you. Right. So they besieged me, yes.
And what did you do with...
But this time round, no, not at all.
What did you do with the petitions or whatever that they...
Actually, what I did was to sort them into some degree of order, because there were about 600 of them.
Yeah.
And then I gave them back to David Cameron's office, number 10 Downing Street.
Right.
And said, please, will you see that these are followed up? Whether they were or not, I can never be sure.
Would you say that you are the preferred choice of journalist by David Cameron and his team?
I would not. But I mean, he's gracious enough to give me an interview from time to time.
Right.
But I don't think he would think I was a camp follower.
I see. Is that because of your outspoken and call it a spade kind of reporting?
Faraz, you know how it is. I mean, you are nobody's, pet dog. And the truth is, neither am I.
Right.
So nobody loves us, except the viewer, because they feel you may be on their side.
Yes, yes. Talking about viewers, and I must ask you this question, because it's what most Sri Lankans, when you mention Channel 4, and you are the face of Channel 4. Yeah. Why is it, John, that in Sri Lanka, Channel 4 News is perceived as having been very one-sided in its reporting of the events in Sri Lanka?
Well, the truth, Faraz, is that we've been no-sided to a large extent, in that we've really not covered Sri Lanka until, the last few years' events. And I think even then, we came to what had happened in this country during the war purely by chance, in that we were sent all this extraordinary and desperate footage of what happened in the final moments of the war. It wasn't trophy, it was more mobile phone and amateur video of what happened. Of course, the government of the day has said this stuff was completely faked and had no truth in it. Of course, then, as you know, it was then investigated by the United Nations, and they concluded it was genuine. And that's what brought us here, to be honest. I mean, when you're brought by a particular development, and that was a development, you follow it up.
Right.
You don't say, well, I'm not going to have anything to do with this because I can't think of a Sinhalese story that would counterbalance it.
Yeah.
But of course there is a Sinhalese story that would counterbalance it. That would have been a thoroughgoing investigation into the Tamil Tigers.
Yes.
But we were never allowed up there
Right.
to investigate them. So it was very difficult ever to do anything much about them. But I mean, now they're gone, and there's the beginnings of another day.
Indeed. One of the other questions that a member of the former Peace Secretariat, Professor Rajiv Vijay-Singh, who's actually been interviewed by Channel 4 News, pointed out was that at the beginning, at any rate, I think the first video in 2009 hadn't been, it wasn't shared with the Sri Lankan government by Channel 4, but they then got a copy of it through somebody at the UN.
Well, I mean, I think our first instinct in any situation like this would be to give it to the United Nations.
Right.
I mean, they are a kind of, they have no particular axe to grind beyond that of trying to find out the truth. I mean, actually, interestingly, the Sri Lankan government never asked for it. I think, well, their first reaction was not to ask for it, but to tell us it was fake.
Right, I see.
So that's a bit tricky. You're not interested in seeing something which you think is fake.
Yes. And on that particular video, that first one that I'm talking about, in 2009, I think it was, the experts hired by the UN to look into it have pointed out that there had been some editing, and there were two versions. One version had 31 frames, and the other had 17, so that something had happened.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not technically, aware of precisely how it all pans out, but all I do know is that in the end, at least a fair quantity of what was a very large quantity of footage did play a part in beginning to clarify what had happened.
And John, Channel 4, tell me about the ownership of Channel 4.
Well, it's not the BBC.
Yes.
It's not private.
Right.
It is a public television service, and it's not for profit. It's a rather rare entity in television.
Right. So it's owned by, in essence, the people of Britain.
It's owned by the people of the taxpayers of Britain, although it costs them nothing, because it is a trust, and all the money they make from commercials and the rest of it goes back into the channel to make more programs.
Right.
So.
And you don't have any in-house production. It's always outsourced.
Channel 4 is a sort of publisher.
Right.
If you think of book publishing, we publish sort of TV.
Right.
And one of the great things about it is that, and people in Sri Lanka will know this, that increasingly, I mean, in the good old days, you could say, the state TV and radio organisation made its own programmes and had a huge sort of organisation. Now, there are lots of very small little production companies. Right. And in Britain, there are hundreds and hundreds of them, thousands possibly. And indeed, we have about 350 different companies making programs for Channel 4.
Right.
And what that ensures, and I think this would be interesting to people in Sri Lanka, is diversity. You are a very diverse society. Buddhists, Hindus, Muslims,
that's right.
Tamils, Sinhalese, etc. So the way to explore diversity in terms of providing programs, etc., is indeed to have lots of different people providing programs.
Right.
Now, there's a very important extra thing, and I imagine you have the same thing in Sri Lanka, and that is we have oversight by a regulator.
Right.
There's a regulator that makes sure that we are balanced.
Right.
So, for example, if they thought that we were unbalanced about Sri Lanka, they'd take us to task.
Right.
They would say, I'm sorry, but within a period of 24 hours, you must balance this with an interview with the Sri Lankan government, for example, or the ambassador, or whoever it is, the High Commissioner.
So they monitor these things?
Yeah.
Right.
Very much so.
I see.
And they, for example, appoint the chairman of our board.
Okay.
We don't. They do.
Right. And the board then appoints a CEO or an MD, and then they would have a panel to decide if Jon Snow is working at Channel 4.
Indeed.
I see. And what about, how do you retain editorial control? because you have 350
Yes.
production houses.
Well, I mean, as I said, it's a production. I mean, it's a publisher, if you like,
Yeah.
as I said. And if you took a publisher, that would have a chairman and CEO
Yeah.
and the rest of it, and they would retain the ethos, the kind of spirit
Yeah.
of the company.
Yeah.
And that would be that.
Right.
Actually, the government is thinking of selling it.
And then how do the workforce?
Of course, that is driven by the fact the government needs money.
Oh, I see.
And we would probably raise, I don't know, a couple of $1 billion if they
And
sell it.
both the mainstream parties, the Conservatives and the Labour Party, are they what's their stand on the selling off of Channel 4?
Well, interestingly, the government might have a difficulty getting a majority to sell it. The Labour Party would be against selling it.
Right.
In fact, most of the parties would be against it, but the Conservative Party might do it.
So the Labour Party may claim that Channel 4 is on their side. It's their
No, I
channel.
think if you think philosophically, I mean, in Britain, basically you have a very pro-capitalist
Yeah.
party and a sort of mildly pro-socialist Labour party.
Yeah.
And so they would naturally, I think, say this would be better left in the hands of the public
Right.
than in the hands of some, the Murdoch Empire, for example.
Indeed. John, I want to ask you, Channel 4 News has sort of led the way in the call for various investigations and accountability in Sri Lanka. In that context, the call for international intervention in Sri Lanka, way back in, say, 2009 and so on.
But that wasn't our call.
No, it wasn't.
That was something which many people in Sri Lanka wanted as well.
Yes.
Many Tamils, anyway.
Well, certainly. Now, we had a situation where the Sri Lankan government had had won the war against terror. And for a while, I think for a couple of months, there was nothing said, and then the onslaught started, the calls for investigation and so on. And in that context, they started calling for international intervention. And the reasons they put forward was that Sri Lanka, there was a belief that Sri Lanka's various checks and balances needed for vibrant democracy, like the independence of the police and the judiciary and the civil service and so on, had been compromised. But in 2015 we had a revolution of sorts, and President Maithripala Sirisena was elected, and along with his Prime Minister Wickremesinghe, whom I normally refer to as Dear Prime Minister, they put in place what we already had and which had been sort of taken down in the Rajapaksa years, the independence of these commissions and so on. So in that context, there are people who now say that there is no need for foreign intervention, that this is a local problem and we have the means to resolve it locally.
Well, in a sense, that's sort of nothing to do with me, because we haven't called for anything. But the United Nations, through the UN Council for Human Rights, has decided that an international dimension would be intelligent, and it would be reassuring both to the Tamil minority and to the outside world.
Did you, when your visit to Jaffna, did you get a chance to talk to ordinary people?
Yeah, I mean, of course, and you'll know as a journalist yourself, it's never easy in a foreign tongue. Of course, I had a translator and the rest of it, but insofar as I could, absolutely, yes, quite a lot of people.
And when you visited the camps,
and of course the chief minister, the chairman of the council, and all those people as well.
Yeah. And did you detect any sort of despair in their outlook, or?
I think what I detected was Not despair, but hope.
Right.
Actually, but also doubt.
Right.
Doubt that anything in the end would ever be done.
Right.
But hope that it would be. I mean, I told you at the beginning of this interview that there is definitely a change of atmosphere there, and a genuine feeling that something has changed. And that something, of course, in a big way, is the change of government, is the coming together of the coalition, Prime Minister, President, and the rest of it. On the other hand, of course, I was there in the aftermath of two events. The first being the President's statement that there wouldn't be any foreign involvement, and then the Prime Minister's statement, which was made at the Hindu festival, which I think came very abruptly, given the length of time since the war, in which he stated that, probably everybody that was missing is dead.
Yes. All right. We'll rejoin John Snow after this short commercial break. Stay tuned.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shaukut.
Good morning again, and welcome back to Newsline, where our very special guest this morning is John Snow, the face of Channel 4 News. So John, you felt comfortable going up to the north this time? No?
I felt excited because I'd never seen that part of Sri Lanka in any detail. I'd been to the south on holiday,
right?
But never been to the north. I'd been to the north with David Cameron on a plane.
Yeah. I
went on the train. And
right.
The train is a wonderful way to see Sri Lanka. It's a paradise of a country. I know people say that and it sounds corny, but it's true. It's the most beautiful country and lovely people. To outsiders, it's very difficult to understand why it doesn't all work.
Right, okay.
It is a fabulous crucible of beauty in which life ferments, but unfortunately it's become a bit of a cauldron down the recent history.
On your visit, you went to see a camp.
In Jaffna.
In Jaffna.
Yeah.
Where there were still...
These are people displaced from Mailidi.
Right.
And Mailidi, as you probably know, was a very, very successful fishing village. A third of all Sri Lanka's prime fish comes from Mailidi.
Right.
And the fishermen were a pretty successful lot. I mean, they were middle class and achievers. And the whole lot, of course, have been displaced by the war, and they're still there in the camp 6 years on in pretty abject poverty.
So
when I tell you, for example, that the toilet block is so dysfunctional that there's a queue of 40-odd people per toilet every morning. This is grim and doesn't need to be like that.
Of course, the answer to that will be that they've replaced the bulk, and this is the residue. And
these are I think about 350 odd families left.
Yeah. The people in the south visit the north, and the north now visits.
Can I say something about the south? Can I say that when you're in Colombo, you cannot believe the amount of building?
Yes.
I mean, last night we were broadcasting because of the time difference at midnight.
Yeah.
And the clink, clank, bang, bang of people up towers working away all the way through the night because it's so hot in the daytime.
That's right.
That it comes as a great surprise to us that everybody's toiling away on these buildings.
That's right.
Late at night. And nobody around seems to worry about the noise.
No,
this is progress.
It is indeed progress.
But how many hotels can this city absorb?
Yes.
And they're huge.
Indeed, they're big monsters coming along.
Yeah.
And when you come back in maybe 2 years' time, hopefully, you'll have even more choice of hotels because the Shangri-La will be open by then, hopefully.
I mean, they are giant hotels by any global standard.
Yes. Now, we want to ask you...
I, of course, being an interviewer myself, was trying to put you off your stride, which I seem to have achieved.
Channel 4 News reported extensively on Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
Often people say to me, if I speak of Channel 4, they'll say, yeah, but what are they doing in Israel, in Gaza, and so on?
Well, if anybody were to go to YouTube or Facebook and put Jon Snow Gaza, they'd see what I've been doing in Gaza. Right. I was there during the war, this last war, 2 years ago. I was there last summer, trying to follow up. And I think we have definitely tried to play a role in raising awareness of what's going on there. And what was going on in that war was so unbalanced. I mean, a hugely resourced military entity in Israel against, a pretty heavily controlled enclave, Palestinian enclave. It was pretty wretched. And of course, as you know, nearly 600 children died.
Indeed.
In 50 days.
And do you think that...
I think that if anybody said, oh, you're only interested in Sri Lanka, it's not true. We're interested in anywhere that needs a spotlight.
Right. And the fruits of this spotlight, the tapes or whatever, have you made that available to the UN?
Yes, indeed we have, yeah, absolutely. And we've worked hand in hand with the UN in Gaza. It's an extremely difficult place to work. Right.
And do you think there'll be an international investigation on...
I very much doubt it. I very much doubt it.
And why is that? As a journalist, when you report on all these things, do you sometimes sit back and wonder why? How can we push that?
There are too many cross currents of international interest in one side or the other. I mean, it's an interesting reflection to ask how is it that the International Court in The Hague has only achieved prosecutions against Africans. Well, they're easier to get at, and there are fewer interests in preventing it happening. Whereas Europeans, in particular, and people from Southeast Asia and the rest of it, there are too many cross currents of other people, there'll be Americans or Chinese or whatever, who would say, look, we're not going to support this.
And do you think your work that you've done, do you think it will have... or has it had any effect on bringing together the sides, reconciliation? Has it had an effect on...
But journalists, unfortunately, that's not our job.
No.
Our job is to try to tell the truth.
Yeah.
And if the truth helps, and it often does, it did in South Africa, and we told the truth in South Africa. We told the truth in Ireland, told the truth in Scotland. And we play a very small part, tiny part, in trying to bring about positive change, in which perhaps peace prevails. But you can't say that you're somebody who goes around fixing things.
No.
We go around looking at things, probing, lifting a little rock and looking what's underneath.
Can you tell me one instance where you have faced grave sort of danger, or where your probing has upset someone so much that perhaps your life has been at risk?
Normally it's not a question of upsetting people in power. Much more serious is where you've got kind of lawless groups.
Yeah.
For example, in the Central American state of El Salvador.
Yeah.
I was there in the aftermath of the assassination of Archbishop Romero.
Right.
And there were death squads.
Yeah.
And there was also a guerrilla force.
Yeah.
And the danger was that you'd get shot up by one of them, either by mistake or on purpose. But that's the sort of issue that you face.
Right.
Not really people in power deciding you need to be rubbed out.
What does your family say when you go off to these hot spots?
Don't get sunburned.
I see. I've got one question coming through the deputy editor of the Island newspaper. It says
a
here,
fine newspaper
of the Island.
Here it is.
Oh, there
we
it
have
is.
it.
There you are.
So just to prove that we have everything.
We have
the
everything.
Daily News.
Daily News
there is no bias here.
There is no bias.
No.
And and Shamindra Ferdinand is asking, the United Nations recommended that identities of those who gave evidence to the panel of experts in Sri Lanka regarding war crimes should not be revealed for 20 years. The recommendation was made in 2011 in March. Would you call for lifting of the UN ban to pave the way for them to give evidence?
I mean, you know, that is something for the United Nations. It's not really for me to call for anything. I genuinely don't know exactly what the issues here are, but clearly any investigation by any country into anything that's happened, and any investigation by the UN, clearly there are people whose lives will be in danger from the very people they seek to bring to justice. So I think a judgment has to be made, and at the moment, you know, that's what's happened.
Just before we finish, can I ask you,
so soon?
can I ask you, did you interview anybody from the LTT? Did you interview Mr. Karno?
Never met anybody from the LTT. And I mean, I'm not an expert on Sri Lanka, as anybody watching would quickly conclude. No, I've never met anybody from the LTT, and know very little about them, except that they were one of the most extreme sort of guerrilla groups. You know, after all, they invented suicide bombing.
Indeed, they did. John Snow.
But that, in a sense, is not the issue now, is it?
No.
It's about communities living together, not finding ways to push them apart.
John Snow, thank you very much for being on Newsline. It's a great pleasure, and I hope you come back to Sri Lanka now that you feel safe.
Well, Faraz, it's an honour, and I do wish all your viewers every good fortune.
Thank you very much. And on that note, thank you for watching Newsline, and to end with my little quote for the day, if reconciliation is to be achieved, the truth must first be unearthed. On that note, thank you for watching Newsline. Take care. God bless.